after I completed my CFP, I was like much more aware of all the importance of disclosure, the importance of like the ethics that it preaches. And my fee disclosure conversation for the client turned into a half-hour conversation. Because here's me trying to like, well, there's this and there's that, and there's this and there's this, and here's this document here, and here's this one over here, and here's what revenue share is. And so you're like doing all this stuff, and you're like, dude, this is insanity.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Broken Dealer Podcast. I'm your co-host, Carmine Corino, with our other co-host, Daren Blonski, my brother from another mother.
Brother from another mother and another coast.
On another coast, you have East Coast, West Coast, without the rivalry. So we're going to, get into Daren's story. First episode was mine, but we want to get right into Daren's story, starting off from, pre-industry. Let's start there. Give us a context of how you got into the industry and all the way to where you are today. So let's kick it off, Daren.
Yeah. So unlike you, Carm, I didn't grow up in the phone business, and I grew up in the fire business, I guess you would say, and have a similar story in the sense I'd kind of made it and had a career lined out in the fire business and chose to go a different way. But that was kind of high school and college time frame. That's how I paid for school, was fighting fires with the Forest Service and with UC Davis, where I went to school. When I got out of school, though, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I felt like if I learned the concept of leadership, I don't know why that stuck in my brain, but it did, that I could do anything I wanted to. Because I knew how to lead people, I could ultimately have a successful career in whatever medium I chose to do as a career. And so I started studying leadership out of college and created these leadership groups for students. And then turned out that there was a whole career in leadership development, training, and team development. And so that was my first kind of foray into a career where I would do leadership training, and we would work with one of our biggest clients at the time, and it's well past now, but was the Department of Corrections in California, where we were doing leadership training to sergeants and the correctional officer.
So, Daren, was that your first gig out of college? Was in this consultancy doing leadership training?
Yeah, it was. So I was working more in a sales role at that point. I wasn't per se up facilitating the classes, but I wanted to be a facilitator, trainer, and then step into it eventually. But in that business, there's definitely ageism, right? Like, here's this young whippersnapper from college. We don't want to hear what you have to say about leadership.
Yeah, the only thing you led was maybe a keg stand at a frat party, right? Yeah.
That didn't count. So did that for about 5 years, and then decided I wanted to really go out and utilize some of the things that I was teaching. And so started working for a local lumber company, oddly enough, and ran a lumber yard down near San Jose, California for some time, but quickly realized and throughout my career, I've had these moments where I call them clear desk moments. And I don't know why it's happened this way, where it's like, I'm sitting there one day, my desk is cleared off, I've achieved all the tasks for the day, and there's just this feeling that comes over me that says, I'm done. Time to move on. And sitting in the lumber company, I'll never forget that one day where it's like, I'm done, time to move on. Like, this is not where I want to spend my career. And I've always been very mindful of begin with the end in mind, old Covey's principle. Mm-hmm. And if I'm associating and around with people, and I'm always looking at what's the end goal here. Like, if I stay in this position long enough, what is the outcome for me and my career? And that was a clear moment. And I was there only a couple of years, but realized like, this is not the business I want to spend my life in. And one of my other coworkers, who also ran a yard in San Francisco area, had been looking at going to work as a financial advisor. It was really interesting to him, and he introduced me to a different company they were hiring. So that was kind of floating around in the back of my head. But at the same time, I got recruited to do some global leadership development for a global leadership firm out of, I think it was they were right near Princeton. So anyway, so I went to work with them and did global leadership development for some time. then eventually went out on my own doing global leadership development and was actually doing a lot of work with India and US. And we're doing a lot of work with Japan and the US. And in particular, the work we did at that time was helping integration with workforces. So for example, there were companies in Japan that were really struggling to innovate. And so what they would do is hire American engineers to do all the innovation here and then bring it back to Japan to then innovate their technology. But the issue was when the engineers from America would go then to Japan and be like, hey, this is what you got to do, blah, 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 blah. They just didn't understand the cultural elements. For example, in Japanese culture, in meetings, you don't actually make decisions in meetings. All the decisions are made before the meeting, and the meeting is just a ceremony of partnership. And so the American engineers like coming in like, hey, I want to talk about what I'm doing in the meeting. They're like, whoa, this is not how we do it here. And so it was teaching context, teaching culture around how to integrate different cross cultures to work more effectively in a global leadership level. And so that was really cool and broke out on my own then after that and started a global leadership firm and did really well. But that was my first foray in having a bad business partner and learned how important picking good partners is there. Wasn't my last experience in picking bad partners, but it was my first experience in picking a bad partner. And so that blew up. And then I quickly found myself like, okay, well, now what? And so I went back and I had remembered about my colleague at the lumber company who said, hey, you should be a financial advisor. And I had always had a real deep interest in the market. I had my first account at age 13. Have been trading the markets. I love the puzzle of the markets and trying to figure out how the markets work from a psychological standpoint. And so that brought me into the business, and I started with that brokerage and very quickly realized it wasn't where I wanted to be. I had already talked to some other RIAs, but I didn't have my CFP. I didn't have a book of business. I didn't have any way to really get in that door. I couldn't afford not to work because I was the sole provider in my family. So I had to earn money. And so I went to work for the brokerage and thought, well, maybe this will work. And I guess it was all probably 6 months into it, and I was doing real well. I referred to myself as a financial planner in an email to a potential prospect. And I immediately got an email back from the compliance department that says, you can't call yourself a financial planner because that insinuates you have a fiduciary obligation to your client.
Very similar to my story. Why wouldn't you want me to put clients' needs first? With that sign I wanted to hang in my office, right? So that was, I know, we talk about that Chinese torture, those drips over the years in these constrained environments. That was like your pipe break moment.
Yeah.
Yours happened rather much more quickly than mine did. And so at this time, you before this, you knew it kind of wasn't optimal. Then this hit. So this was your moment. This was the straw that broke Daren's back, let's call it. So at this point, what was your thought process then at this point once you got that email back?
I knew it wasn't optimal. And often in life, things aren't perfect, right? And that's why I want to be real careful in this podcast of not making people who are working in a brokerage and maybe want to leave, but for different reasons can't. The intent isn't to say you can still do really good work for people in a brokerage. It's just harder.
That's a good point, because even in where I came from, the insurance company side, there are great people there, and there are people there that would never put clients in harm's way because they have integrity and things like that. The environment's not optimal if the fiduciary model is where they want to be. I think that's a caveat.
Yeah, there's always going to be good people anywhere, right? But we go back to what I said in our first episode, and that is, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome, right? And I'm a big believer that you need to align the incentives with the desired outcomes in any organization. As an entrepreneur, that's really important. And in aligning the employee or the advisor's incentives so that they're serving the client in their best interest, I think is absolutely critical and important. And so that's what I saw in this idea that somehow if I was going to insinuate a fiduciary responsibility to my clients, that I couldn't do that because that would jeopardize me legally and the firm I was working for at the time legally. To me, that was a non-start. But I also knew I had a young family. I literally had my second kid on the day I started. I was able to, they call it a can sell date as a brokerage. I literally had my second kid that day.
Wow.
That I started. And I had 2 young kids. I had the Irish twins. They were very close together, and I was a sole income earner. So I didn't have the choice of just saying, well, just because this rubs me a little wrong, I can just leave and, go find something different. That wouldn't be very pragmatic of me. So I knew I had to plan my exit and eventually. And what was interesting too, is about a little time after that, I had another leadership firm come to me, and this was like one of the top leadership firms in the nation. It was working in, right on Market Street in San Francisco. I'd hit the pinnacle of where I would have been for that business. And I actually did quit that brokerage and go back to work for a week. And so I quit for a week, and I don't think I've told you this story, Carm. But
No, you haven't. This is first I'm hearing.
Yeah, so they came at me, offered me a ton of money for that point in my life. You can work, you can have the big corner office on Market Street. Like, it was like, hit it, and go work with corporations around the world and teach leadership and facilitate leadership. And I thought this was great, man. So they came at me and said, here's the deal. And I took the deal. Luckily, that some of my managers were like still trying to negotiate me not to leave. And so I went for a week of training, and then I was sitting in that training, and I was just like, no, this isn't right. This isn't right, which was really a hard pill to swallow, because for me, that was it, dude. I'd hit the pinnacle of the leadership career I was on and what I was doing. I had got the job, but I just had something in me that was twisting. And I couldn't figure out quite. So I went back to work for the broker. I said, I'm really sorry. I went down that road. I'm focused. I want to stay here and go.
What was it in that corporate leadership company that made you say, whoa, this was a mistake?
It was just a gut feel, man. It was just like, for me, I think what is still offered, because a rub for me and my family in the corporate leadership world was that business. You fly out Monday, you're back Thursday, you work from home Friday. Like, that's that business. And you do that most of the time. And I knew that was going to make it very difficult to be a father. And being a father was really important to me. And being a present father, like a father that shows up to the games and can take kids to school and pick kids up. And I grew up with I had mentioned earlier, with a dad who was in the fire service, who was a great dad, but he was gone a lot during the summer, right? He was like, I don't remember having many vacations because he was on fires. And I knew I didn't want that for my children. I wanted to be there, be present. I wanted to know my kids. And so I knew that my career had to align in such a way that allowed for that. But secondly, it's not cheap living in California. It's very expensive, as it is in Jersey. And it's difficult to find careers where both parents don't have to work full time.
Well, that and affording you an opportunity to have flexibility.
Yes.
Because like that corporate job would have paid you very well, but you're trading, your whole Monday to Thursday of being detached from your family. That's the cost.
That's right.
To you. And that was a non-negotiable for you.
And, had I been young out of college and single, showing up to one Market Street or wherever it was, I forget the address, in the city, suit on, like you'd made it big, like that would have been cool. But I had already moved past that from a career. I was more of a mid-career person, and I'd had the fancy jobs a little bit and been there, done that. So I knew I had to arrange things right financially for my family, for flexibility to be a father. And the financial planning world, I felt like I could achieve that. Plus, I had met a lot of other people. Like I told the story in episode 1 of this like really successful this really successful life insurance salesman. And I'm like, I know I can do better than that guy. Right. And I had met a lot of people like that where I'm like, this guy's killing it. And he's making a lot of money. And I know I can be just as good or if not better than that guy. And so like, and if that's true, then I can have a 3-day week if I wanted, or a 4-day week, and have flexibility to take off at 3 and go to the basketball game to watch my kid and still do really well financially. So I saw that, and fortunately saw that. And I had a really good friend, a guy named Jacques. He was actually a wholesaler, and I was just open with him, like, hey man, here's what I'm wrestling with and thinking about. What do you think? And he's like, man, like, I just know you'll be successful if you just keep going, dude. I know a lot of advisors, just keep going. And he had that confidence in me that I didn't necessarily have in myself at that point.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, I was eating dirt, man. I was out. The firm I worked for, their way of prospecting was going door to door.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So I was knocking doors, and in a little town, I had no history in the business. Every other advisor, had a relationship with, every other house, and you couldn't sell that person. So it made it very difficult. So on a street, there might be 20 people, and on that street, 5 were already working with the firm I was with. And so I was like, this isn't going to work well. But anyway, I kept going and eventually worked through that. About 4.5 years in working for the brokerage,
Mm-hmm.
I had my clean desk moment at the brokerage.
So take me back real quick, because you mentioned the CFP. So you were in the process of getting your CFP. You knew how important that was while you were at this brokerage firm. How many years in did you start that process?
The firm I was with wouldn't let you do it until you were a certain level in the firm. You'd sold a certain amount. And so I think I started 3 years in, if I'm recalling correctly.
So now we're 4 years in. Did you have your CFP at this time?
Yeah. I had moved very quickly through these different criteria levels after I recommitted. And I always tell people, when you're clear, the universe is clear. And when you're clear, everything will align. And when I got clear, everything started aligning for me. When I was no longer half foot, that leadership thing, that was my dream. That's where I wanted to be. And I said, no, full force ahead. This is where I'm headed. When I said that, things started to happen for me. I moved very quickly. I was very successful working for the brokerage I did. And at that time, I moved to something called level 8. There's 10 levels, and 10 was the highest. And I'd moved that far in like 4 years. So wow. I moved real quick. And I got my CFP. So what I do is every day at 2:00, I come in. I was very disciplined. At 2:00, from 2 to 6, I would study for CFP every day. And that's once I had established enough revenue coming in, I could do that. And I got my CFP, and which is just funny. I took the test for the CFP right down the street from where that leadership job was that I did.
Oh, geez.
It was just kind of a moment. And right after I passed the CFP, I walked back to the ferry building and take the ferry back across the bay. And I sat there and had some ice cream and just kind of ate it. And it was just this moment where I put so much into my CFP and getting it. As all those who are CFPs know, it's a grind.
It is.
Even if you're a super smart person, it's a grind. So that was just kind of a moment for me. And then I got my CFP. And then once I got my CFP, that made it even more blaring, the difference between a fiduciary and a broker. And it was kind of like molasses, right? They're like, well, you always have to work in the best interest of the client. But then you're like, but my incentives don't really align with that all the time.
Hey, Daren, let me ask you something.
Yeah.
On this topic. Did you have to so at the insurance company I was at, once you became a CFP, they didn't congratulate you. They didn't say, hey, look, you did the work to differentiate yourself to make you a better advisor. No. You have to now every single client you engage with, you have to hand them a form. Well, they call the CFP disclosure form that stated, I have what most would consider a conflict of interest, and this is why I'm conflicted. And was literally a 4-page document of all the conflicts of interest that existed because if a client working with me and I'm in this environment, this is how I'm not a fiduciary. Imagine handing that form to every client to sign. Imagine that. And if we were truly acting in the client's best interest, why would I need a form stating if any client actually read it, they would never have worked with me.
Well, that's the thing. And that's what I think one of the big moments for me is after I completed my CFP, I was like much more aware of all the importance of disclosure, the importance of like the ethics that it preaches. And my fee disclosure conversation for the client turned into a half-hour conversation.
Wow.
Because here's me trying to be like, well, there's this and there's that and there's this and there's this. And here's this document here. And here's this one over here. And here's what revenue share is. And so you're like doing all this stuff and you're like, dude, this is insanity. And like, I mean, it was half the conversation felt like I was disclosing fees and where they came from and how I got compensated for that. Whereas like today as an independent advisor, it's a 5-minute convo tops.
It's not even. Yeah, I think we've had this conversation. If you can't explain to a client how you're paid in less than 30 seconds,
yeah,
go back to the drawing board. Because imagine, let's practice empathy for a moment here. If you were a client and it took you 4.5 minutes to explain to me how you get paid and how your company makes money, I'm going to sit there going, something's not right. When I hire an attorney, it's $300 an hour. My accountant charged me X for my filing. My copay is X. Right? These other professional services, I know what I'm paying. For the most part, I know what I'm getting. But if it takes you 4.5, 50, and come on, I mean, that's must have been a huge red flag for you because, in fact, I think your compliance constraints got harder after you became a CFP.
I don't know that it changed from a firm level, but what it made me is very aware of how ineffective the previous process was. And like, I'm like, well, we're not doing this the way it should be done here, folks. And it really was concerning to me. And so I had to figure that out for myself. And then it's like, okay, well, there's got to be a better way to do this. And then I went out and I interviewed with all the firms on the street, right? What are my options out there? Now that I do have my CFP, now that I do have a book of business, what are my options out there? And I talked with all the likely suspects. After I went to each of the brokerage, I was going to get some big checks if I moved to another brokerage, like big ones, like multi-million-dollar checks, game-changing checks. But there was just this thing inside of me, the same feeling I had when I almost took that another leadership job, just twisted inside. Like, wait, so I'm going to move to this brokerage. I'm going to take a big check, which is great for my family and me, but then I'm going to convince my clients, and I'm not really putting them in a better position. I'm actually putting them in a equal or worse position because I'm moving them to another broker. Mm-hmm. And that was the moment where I said, okay, well, what's independence look like, right? So then it was down the path of talking with all the likely suspects, what we call the hybrid advisors, those who say they're independent, but they're actually just brokers. And that was very alluring too, because there was big checks there. And eventually, fortunately, I had my future business partner, who was an independent advisor. He was there to talk to. And when I talked to him, I'm like, well, this is the clearest, purest model. When he told me how he gets paid, et cetera, it took 2 minutes or whatever to explain how that works. And I said, wow, this is really great, but it also had the most amount of risks to it, right? The path wasn't clear. You didn't know how it worked. Fortunately, this gentleman had already built that path, and he was working for that brokerage prior to me and was very successful. And he became my business partner shortly thereafter, for good or bad. I learned some good things from him, some not so good things from him, and built a firm with him. So I left the brokerage and went independent as a pure RAA, a registered investment advisor, and built up the firm. We brought over a lot of other advisors. Short story, we'll dig into it in later episodes. But we brought over a ton of other advisors and built this really successful firm that's now since sold. I was with them for, 3-ish years. And we built that up, and we actually had 11 different partners at that firm.
Wow.
And let me just tell you, anyone who's thinking of partnership, 11 partners is a really bad idea. And it creates so much challenge in making decisions. And what I realized in that is that all of us had a different client set, and trying to align those client sets got hard and uncomfortable. And that's when I said, I think it's time to be on my own. And it was kind of messy disconnecting from that group.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually I made that happen. And in 2020, January of 2020, picked perfect time and crushed that one.
Well, you got before. I got it where my attorney said, hey, pal, we need to push our start date because the SEC, I can't reach anyone. They're all working from home. You actually had much better timing than I did. So we had some challenge there, but we were able to overcome it, thankfully.
Yeah, we basically opened, I think we registered actually late 19 and then opened doors 20. And, started off our introductory audit that you get from the SEC was all virtual because of that. And
mine was too, yeah.
It was an interesting time to start in the business. We basically opened the doors for a month and a half and then went completely virtual, which is interesting because the fabric of our RIA now is very virtual. Like there's 35 different people that work for this firm now, all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
And we've grown. We're well over $1 billion now since 2020 in 5 years. And it's been a great ride. It's been, lots of scary moments, lots of ups and downs. But, the feeling of self-determination that literally I wake up every day and I choose, I love that, right?
Yeah.
And I love that feeling. I love the pure of the model. I can just straight talk clients. Here's how it works. Here's how it is. And I'm not sacrificing ethically. And I don't have any pinches in the back of my mind going like, well, this is kind of how it works. And I don't have to apologize for my business model anymore, which is awesome.
I call that elevator music when I was at the insurance company, because no matter how good of a day I had, some client success, maybe new client acquisition, whatever was happening, that elevator music was playing in the background of, well, hey, did you hit your number this year? Because you have to. And we all know elevator music, it's usually low. When it's quiet, you can hear it better, but it's never good. Name me an elevator music. Anytime you ever heard elevator music that was good. It's never happened. So that's playing in the background of, okay, roger that. You had a good day, but remember, 9 months left. You got to hit this number, and it would just play. It was a huge distraction. And but now choosing to not have that distraction, maybe take on clients that you and I shouldn't have worked with or was outside of our focus, and again, another distraction, has allowed us both to grow in ways that I thought I would never be able to attain so quickly, because growth is more about elimination than it is about adding stuff. And by eliminating that elevator music and the things these firms made us do, just allowed us to run on the track that we built, not what they built. So very similar story. So you're here today, independent, growing fast. You've done a heck of a job. Now you're on your third partner now, but this partner actually 3 times the charm, right? So
shout out to Chris. I mean, he is, he's a dream, man. Like having a good partner is just incredible. And especially when you've had bad partners.
Yeah.
When you have good partners, it is just really cool. And what I saw immediately with Chris is it was the first time that I had seen the true 1 + 1 does equal 3.
Mm-hmm.
And we just started ripping and growing. And he brings in a lot of things that I don't. He rounds me out in a lot of ways that I don't. Like I'm much more visionary, entrepreneur, kind of got that edge a little bit. And he's very he's very, he's the Midwest guy, right? He just works. He's very focused. He gets his job done. He's very grounding. He's the nicest guy ever. I always tell people, like, if you have an issue with Chris, you have an issue with yourself, my friend.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And just a good dude. And so I'm really, really grateful for his partnership. And having had some bad ones, man, it's a huge
You appreciate the good ones, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's a great story. Just, Daren and I can speak for 3 hours on each of our stories. This is a great real starter of who we are, where we came from. So want to end on that note and talk about our next episode is going to be what probably a lot of you are thinking, how do I know when I'm ready to have that independent conversation? Or how do I know when I'm ready to start looking at other options? So we're going to talk about, the differentiating mindsets that Daren and I see speaking to advisors from all around the country that maybe want to learn about independence, and some red flags that I see initially in conversations where like, hey, look, you need to stay where you're at. I think you're going to be much better off. Or the conversations like, okay, you need to exit. You need to plan an exit today. So we're going to get into that of, to kind of give yourself a gauge on where you're at on that thermometer. And join us on our next episode of Broken Dealer Podcast. Daren, thank you for your time. Great story, as always. And we will see everyone soon.
Thank you for listening to Broken Dealer. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit our website at www.brokendealer.com. Don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Carmine Corino and Daren Blonski. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Fermata Advisors, LLC, DBA Sonoma Wealth Advisors, LLC, and Cornerstone Planning Group are both independent registered investment advisors and are non-affiliated entities. The opinions expressed by Daren Blonski and Carmine Corino on this show are their own and do not reflect the opinions of Sonoma Wealth Advisors, LLC, and Cornerstone Planning Group. All statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. The information presented is for educational purposes only and is not intended to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for any individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Past performance is not indicative of future performance.